dare great things for Christ. Christ calls us to dare great things. In the marketplace, as well as in the mission field, there has never been a time like the present for the spirit of the Catholic entrepreneur. Now is the time for men and women of great courage and great vision to engage our church and our culture. Now is the time to dare great things. And here is your host as we dare great things, Father Nathan Cromley, the president and founder of the St. John Institute.
Leadership puts us in the spotlight. Like it or not, leaders are out in front. If we follow the ways of the world, the natural prominence of leadership can result in negative consequences like arrogance and self-conceit. It was just the opposite, however, for St. John the Baptist. He used his prominence to promote Christ, and he learned how to make himself disappear behind the glory of the one who came after him. This is part 4 of our series on the bold leadership of St. John the Baptist. Well, I certainly hope you're enjoying this series. We're looking into the leadership of St. John the Baptist, which is a subject I bet you have never thought of before. We can think many things of St. John the Baptist, but typically we don't think of him as a leader. And yet, what a leader he was. Not only does he have disciples, right? People who are there with him at the river and who are being trained by him in holiness, but he also has influenced all of Jerusalem, the biggest city in their country, and all of Judea. They're coming out to be baptized by him. I mean, he has literally the leaders of the religious society at his time, the Pharisees, coming to be baptized by St. John. Soldiers coming to be baptized by St. John the Baptist. This guy's, his influence is enormous. It's so enormous that the apostles themselves, St. Peter, the first pope, is going to walk 100 miles just to listen to the preaching of this man. We know that from John chapter 1. He was an incredible leader. All of Jerusalem was listening to his voice, and he was making his proclamation resound. Now, all that being said, to be fair, it wasn't exactly like he was an organizational leader. I'm not quite sure what the organization around St. John the Baptist would have looked like. You know, he probably had a very good integrator who was behind him, who was making it all happen. Because in fact, his spirit is what we all admire. His power to stand in front of the powers that are with freedom and to make the proclamation that he made. Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And then he went on to tell exactly what that meant for every class of person that was there. He was free. You see, that's the power of St. John the Baptist. And the bold leadership is that he used that freedom and he put it out there. He said it like it was. He didn't hold back, right? And this is very different for those of us who are in the professional world where you beholden to organizations. I mean, there's nuances to all of this. Our freedom will be expressed maybe differently and should be expressed differently than St. John the Baptist because we're different people. We're in different situations, right? But what we can all imitate is this boldness of being true to who he was and doing the job that Christ gave him to do unabashedly and to do it for him. This is why I always say that every Christian is called to be a leader, because every Christian is called to be a saint, and every saint is by definition a leader. They impact the world around them in a positive way. They assert what is inside of them, outside of them, for impact. Right? It doesn't matter if they're recognized by a high position in society. It doesn't matter the extent of their power, for the depth of their leadership. John the Baptist was not recognized at a high level of his society. He was out in the desert screaming, right? And yet look at the impact of his message. And his message was very simple. It was very focalized. The Messiah is coming, and you need to repent to be ready for him. Very simple message. We can repeat it all the way back to this day. He had that part down. And the depth of what that meant was inner conversion in the souls of the people who heard him. The impact of John the Baptist was simply incalculable because he was doing God's work. right? Now, you're doing God's work as well. Some of you are doing God's work with great wealth. Some of you are doing God's work with great positions of power. Some of you are doing God's work in your families, accepting the role of motherhood, accepting the role of fatherhood, of being a great grandfather for your grandchildren, all these things. It doesn't matter so much what the role is on the outside. That's up for Christ to determine. Your role is the mission field to which Jesus sends you, right? And each one of us has a different field of mission. What matters is that we allow Christ's grace to set us free so that we do the job that has been put before us and that we do it with great love. When we do that and we put ourselves into our jobs, when we put our name behind our actions become impactful and our jobs become ministries. Ministries of something greater. This is really what St. Thomas Aquinas would call an instrumental cause. Okay, this is a very important term. You can write that one down. Instrumental causality. Because Thomas is meditating with us on the various ways that God moves the world, right? And he says God is the primary cause of all things. He's behind every cause. Anything that happens in the end because of God. But yet God uses secondary causes. That's another term. He's the primary cause, right? And then he uses secondary causes, which are things that have power because of him, but have their own power in their nature. He made their nature and he made their nature powerful. And those secondary causes, well, they can do things too. They do things by their nature, right? Like an axe. He uses the example of an axe. He says, well, like a person uses an axe in order to cut, right? So the axe is a secondary cause from the primary cause, which is I'm using the axe, it's me, but I'm using this thing that has this ability, right? Well, each one of us is a secondary cause. We have the ability to speak well, the ability to be encouraging, all of the different strengths that we have, the ability to organize, the ability to think strategically, the ability to grind through things, the ability to be creative. And God will allow us to let those qualities shine in his service. And behind us, he will be inspiring us and motivating us and using us, so to speak, yes, according to our nature to work out his great design, using our gifts for his glory. But you know, that it's hard for some people to really accept. It seems humbler to simply say, no, I don't have any causality. It's only God who does anything. But I want to point out something. Thomas Aquinas reminds us that God loves to use secondary causes. He loves to allow his servants to do things that he could do by himself for 3 reasons. The first reason Aquinas gives is that God does this because it glorifies him. And he gives the example of an earthly king that has an entourage of highly successful people who execute in the name of the king has a greater earthly glory. It shows and demonstrates a greater power to be surrounded by powerful people. Even if all of their power depends upon yours, the fact that you can see their power reveals what otherwise is hidden. God is glorified by his creatures possessing gifts like you, right? And then the second reason he says he does this is for the sake of the servant himself. Like you and I being used by God is an incredible honor, a privilege, a grace. Aquinas says we get to experience something of the life of God himself by being associated to God's work. So it's an act of mercy, he says, to allow his creatures to do what he could do by himself. And then finally, the third reason God loves to use secondary causes, loves to use you and me, is because by so doing, we can connect with the freedom of those who are around us in a more intimate and easy fashion. We are like the people that we are ministering to. And that allows those people to give their response back in utter freedom, a freedom that God longs for. I know it's a hard thing to accept. A lot of us resist that. We say, no, I have to disappear. Well, you do have to disappear. We're going to talk about that. That's what John the Baptist teaches us. But I want to remind you that this disappearing, the best way to disappear is to disappear into God's will. And God's will was to make you and to make you able to serve him.
Would you like to hear more from Father Nathan? Join the St. John Leadership Network and receive a 2-minute glance at the gospel every Sunday morning right to your phone. To learn more, go to www.stjohnleadershipnetwork.org/member and join for free today.
St. John the Baptist is such a fascinating figure because he's just so powerful, right? His charism is so outstanding. He's eating locusts and honey, living in the desert, crying out this bold proclamation, and he saw such great fruits behind it. You kind of wonder if that didn't shock him a little. I mean, it must have been hard for a man who was so humble as to disappear in front of the message that he's proclaiming and literally let his whole life be consumed for the purpose and the mission that God gave him. It must have been a bit of a shock to see all the people fawning after him, recognizing him, Just think of the journey he had to make inwardly to keep his humility active and alive. I mean, we know he succeeded because when Jesus Christ comes to be baptized by him, John doesn't say, okay, very good. That's what, you should be, Jesus, because I'm really important. No, instead, he says, I should be being baptized by you. You see, he didn't let his success go to his head. But you could say, well, what was his secret, right? I mean, all of us who are successful, all of us who are leading, who are in a position where we're in front of other people, we have to be careful of this. We wouldn't want the gifts that God gave us to go to our heads, to make us think that actually, no, it doesn't come from God. It comes from me. I'm the one who's doing these amazing things because I am just so terrific. Well, it's a delicate balance because on the one hand, well, you are terrific. I mean, God made you and he did give you gifts, and those are part of who you are. Your intelligence, your drive, right? Your discipline, all those things. They're really important, right? But when they go to our head, what that means is where we forget that they came from God. We think that they are ours for our own sake, and then we glorify ourselves in them, when in fact it's supposed to be just the opposite. I mean, if you have a gift, it's supposed to be given. It's not, you don't get an award for having gifts. You get a mission for having gifts, right? If God equipped you with great talent, it's so that you get busy and put them to work, right? He's got work for you to do. And instead we sit back and say, oh no, see, I'm very gifted. And God's like, so remember this line, to whomever much has been given, much will be expected. It's a word right from Jesus. If I have been given much, it's so that I give it away. And the greater that I am, the greater a servant I need to be. Even Jesus himself, right? Who is obviously the most gifted of them all. He ends up washing our feet, and he says, as I have done to you, you too must do to each other. So we have to always keep that in mind, right? Our gifts are not a sign that somehow we're better. Our gifts are that we are called to give and to serve in the name of Jesus. And so you kind of wonder, how does St. John the Baptist stay that way? How did he stay hidden, right? Even though he was so gifted, what a preacher, what a character, right? What virtue of soul. And everybody's saying you are the holiest man in Israel. How did he keep from being corrupted by that? I think the first thing we see is that physically he was an ascetic. All right, so he did not indulge his flesh. Even the angel, when it was announcing his birth, told his father Zechariah, he shall refrain from strong drink from his birth. Okay, so that's an amazing thing, right? Refraining from strong drink and then eating locusts and honey. I mean, as glorious as it might sound, it's kind of a boring diet at the end. You can picture like, what do you put on your locust to flavor them up? It must be really quite a life. And he embraced that. He embraced the hardships of things as a way of reminding him that he was no better than anybody else, right? And it's a great summons for us. Do we have a place in our life for asceticism? Remember St. Jose Maria Escrivá, who was a Catholic priest who worked a lot with influential people in his society of his day. He used to say, you should never let a meal go by without salting it with some sort of penance, even if it's a small thing. But you should always take the opportunity when you receive gifts from God to also mortify yourself in a small way. Well, this is a great little practical thing, because otherwise we might think that in fact our life is supposed to be always smooth, always wonderful, and we can forget that we're workers in the vineyard just like everybody else who might not have those privileges that we have. A second way that John the Baptist stayed humble is that he kept his eyes on his task at hand. He was there to make a proclamation and to baptize, and he worked, right? The work that we do is not always glorious. In fact, it's often very difficult. It's much more glorious to have people ask us about the work that we do than to actually do it. Because when you're actually doing it, it's hard. It's hard, it requires focus, and you're dealing with things that are less than you, less than your relationships. In many ways, you're giving your time and you're giving your life as a sacrifice, and toil can even be a part of it. You don't think it was toil for John the Baptist to baptize thousands of people in the hot sun? I've been to the place where he did the baptism. It's completely exposed. I mean, he would have been in the sun with crowd and crowds of people. You can imagine the patience he had to exert, all the needs that were put upon him, the political pressurings he had to endure, and he did it. See, a humble person, it's not a question of having gifts or not having gifts. It's a question of putting yourself through the labor of giving your gifts effectively, putting your hand to the plow and working. Because work is a great way to equalize all kinds of people. At the St. John Institute, I take men up, for example, on a ski hut trip where we put backpacks on and we literally climb uphill. We go uphill on a mountain. And I'll have on the same trip people who are extremely successful, very financially secure, and people who are struggling with finances or who are in jobs where they're never going to rise to a height of society. And yet when they're on our trip, everybody's equal. Why? Because there's a great equalizer when you put on a 40-pound pack and skis and then ski uphill for 5 or 6 hours. In the end, you discover we're all the same. Well, St. John the Baptist did the same thing. It's easy to get a big head when you have empty hands. But when your hands are full, you stay humble by the labor that you're doing. And then thirdly, I think his humility would come from the love that he had for the truth. In other words, he knew that the one coming after him was greater than him, and he was there to serve his God. I think for many of us, we lose track of that. We forget that we're here to serve God, that God is greater than us. We can be seduced by the glory we have in society to think that that means that we're better. And I mean, it's a natural thing that we do. Only the man who prays every day, who humbles himself before God, can be able to stand in front of the world, kneeling before God, actively worshiping him, remembering that everything he gave you was for him, is a constant requirement for those who are in leadership. And John the Baptist typified this. He was the perfect example of this because everything in him was consumed by this love that he had for God. It's a great reminder. Where are you in your spiritual life? Where are you in your prayer life? Don't think that you can lead in this world without praying before your God. The two go hand in hand, and John the Baptist teaches us this.
Would you like to start your Thursday mornings with a scriptural leadership lesson? Join the St. John Leadership Network, where Father Nathan hosts a 30-minute call at 6:30 a.m. in all 4 U.S. time zones. To learn more, go to www.stjohnleadershipnetwork.org/member and join for free today.
You know, as we meditate on St. John the Baptist's bold leadership, I want to bring out a particular statement that he says that's extremely powerful. He says, he must increase and I must decrease. And the one he's referring to, of course, is Jesus. Jesus must increase and I must decrease. I say that because that's not exactly what you see typified today. When you look at the leadership in a country, right? And you see everyone pawning after the media, trying to claw their way up to the top, putting down the people who are their competition, right? Or seeking to exalt themselves. I have this title or this title. There's so many finanglings behind the scenes and even illicit relationships that form, all in the quest of power. And it's almost as if people think that if they can climb the ladder, that somehow or other they're higher than everyone else. And that might be true in society. You can climb a ladder and get higher in the eyes of others in terms of power. But is power the real thing we should be going after in life? Is power the arbiter of goodness? If you have greater position, if you have a greater leadership potential recognized in society, a greater scope, a greater platform, are you a better person? This is the question. How does God see that? I mean, in the end, does it really, do you think when you appear before God, God's going to say, oh, you were a very important person? Well, you got to be careful because St. Paul actually says God has no regard for personalities or personages, for the people that we are in the eyes of, it doesn't matter to him at all. Your title does not matter to God. Now, it does matter in that you could be his instrument and exert influence, which we need to do. But the instrumentality that we have and the influence that we exert is not what will save us, okay? What will save us is our humility in front of him, the awe-filled love that fills our heart for the one who died for us, and the respect that we show other people. St. Francis de Sales put it beautifully. He said, "At the moment of our death, we will be judged by the King of Glory, not according to the office that we held, but according to the humility and love with which we held it." You see, there's a whole different requirement here. You see, this is a spot where Christianity sets itself apart, goes different from what you would normally expect to hear in a worldly sense. I mean, in a worldly sense, it's all about you being recognized by other people. I mean, even Aristotle, way back 400 years before Jesus, he said that the greatest thing you could achieve on the earth is glory. And the ancients used to see that your name never being forgotten is the number one thing. So they make statues, they kind of immortalize their heroes to say that now your fame will never end. Everyone will speak of you always, right? And Aristotle points out, you know what the problem with that is, though? It's only a material good, meaning that that's a good that depends upon other people holding you in high esteem. It's not a good that you have on your own. It's a good that you need to win from others, which means it's always held by a little string that could be jerked back. The day could come when you lose that reputation of yours, and then where will you be? Well, if you live in a worldly mindset, well, then you are nothing, right? That's why you shouldn't live in a worldly mindset. That's why you should become Christians, right? Because the Christian stands all that on its head. And it says it might be a fine thing to be honored by people, fine, but it means nothing in an ultimate sense, right? In the ultimate sense, what matters is our fidelity to God and the way that he looks at us, which is also the way that we look at him and the way that we treat the poorest of the poor. This is how Jesus encourages us to lead. And so if we lead this world, we need to lead it with that perspective, helping remind everyone of what really makes life valuable and true. I think you could sum it up really by saying we lead by love. When you love, you want the one that you love to be even greater than you. They must increase and you must decrease, right? Your joy is to give life to another. I think of the example of a candle a lot. When I think of my mothers and the leadership of a mother, I think of the image of a candle. This beautiful light and warmth that is exuded in a dark and cold world by the soul of a mother, the love of a mother, right? The leadership. And yet that flame that's burning there on the top of the candle only burns there because the candle is willing to give itself and give its life at the service of that flame. It's fueled by the self-gift of the candle. And a mother gives every day all of her energy towards this beautiful love for her children. And yet that's one less day that she can give, one less year she can give. But by surrendering to that mission, light and heat is made present in our cold and dark world. And in the same way, each one of us is called to put who we are behind this gift of love, to let others flourish, to build them up, to serve, even if it's by our leadership, and even if it's by us being at the top, to make sure that the reason we're at the top is to help everyone who's at the bottom, to bless them, to build them up, to encourage them. It's not about us in the end, it's about our people. And when you look at the great Christian saints who are kings and who lived and strove as great rulers, all of them became saints and were great kings because they put their kingdom first. They were there as the humble guardians of the common good of their people. And therefore, that required great dedication, great efforts, right? You have to make good financial decisions. You have to make good investments. You have to generate a profit if you're in a business, obviously. And you need to let your business thrive and grow, but always without forgetting this incredible responsibility that everything here doesn't belong to me, it belongs to God. And I am its humble steward. I remember one time speaking with a Catholic man who owned an immense hardwood forest and a lumber mill and made products for people and was a very, very successful businessman. And I asked him one time, how many acres do you own? And he smiled and he said, I don't, but God owns 2,000 acres of hardwood, and I am his steward. And I thought about that, and what a great thing just to have him say that, just to hear somebody actually say that, it really struck home. That's the he must increase and I must decrease, because in the end, the one who comes after me is greater than I am, right? Because he existed before me. That's St. John the Baptist. He practiced the art of leading by disappearing. And the more that he disappeared, the more that he became an act of service, the greater a leader that he was. It's so amazing. He, on the one hand, disappeared by leading, because his leadership was all for the sake of God. And so people didn't stop at him. They wanted to know who the Messiah was, who was coming after him. He pointed them towards the Messiah by himself staying thirsty for his coming. He disappeared, you see, because the greater that his fame became on the outside, the more that it was able to point people away from him to the one he was serving on the inside. And conversely, the more that he loved Christ on the inside, the more it didn't matter how great his fame became on the outside. God could use him like a perfect instrument. You see, he could be effective and impacting the world around him because he was so enamored with the one that he was serving within him. And this is such a pattern for us, right? If God is calling us to lead in our families, we have to need to take that. We need to lead. We need to parent our children. We need to step up and set the culture in our home. We need to inspire our spouses to love God more. We need to lead. We need to be impactful, right? But we don't have to do it in a way that exalts us, because we're doing it at the service of the one who has summoned us to serve him by our leadership. And when we do that, we end up creating the same spirit of humility. The more effective that we are, the humbler we become, because we realize that in fact, we're disappearing. That as he increases, we decrease. And as we decrease, he increases. We lead by disappearing, just like St. John the Baptist.
Dare great things for Christ.
Share your feedback with Father Nathan. Send us an email at communications@stjohninstitute.org. That's communications@stjohninstitute.org. And visit www.stjohninstitute.org and sign up for our newsletter to receive updates from Father Nathan.